Welcome to PhD PDF Scholarship podcast with Dr. Avinkrishnan. Dear all, hope you are doing well. Welcome to the second episode of PhD PDF Scholarship podcast. This is an exclusive group for engineering research aspirants. This group has researchers currently doing PhD and postdoctorate at international universities and premium institutes. Also scientists working at R&D labs who are willing to share their experience and keen to help aspirants to evolve them as researchers. To bring them into limelight and get to know their experience is the main intention of our podcast. To kick off our second episode, we are honored to have a renowned researcher, Dr. Avinkrishnan AB from the Department of Aerospace Engineering, University of Michigan, United States. So before moving ahead, let's have a quick intro. Over to you, Arun.
Hi everyone. So I am Arun K. and I have a PhD in Thermal Science from National Institute of Technology, India. After my PhD, I did my postdoctoral studies in Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, as well as in University of California, United States. Currently, I'm working as an assistant professor in Center for Computational Engineering and Networking at Amartya Vishwavidyapeetham, Coimbatore campus in India. My research interests are in the area of solar thermal applications, thermal energy storage, desalination, water harvesting, and recovery. Over to Nirmal.
Hi all, myself Nirmal Madhavan. I recently completed my PhD in high temperature computation from Swinburne University of Technology, Melbourne, with research collaborators at Tata Steel, Netherlands. Currently, I am associated as a research assistant for Tata Steel's Netherlands Industrial Research. Prior to PhD, I did my master's in thermal and fluid engineering from IIT Guwahati, and I was working for Indian Naval Scoping Class Submarine as senior engineer. I did my bachelor's from Kerala University, and after graduation, I was working with Infosys Engineering Unit as design and value engineer for Airbus and Bombardier Unit. Over to you, Prem.
Hello everyone, my name is Prem Kumar. I'm currently based out of Toronto, Canada. Basically, I've been here since 2019. Before which, I used to work for 2 years for Inloxis Techno Private Limited. I did my master's from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, in Material Science and Engineering. Before which, I used to do my bachelor's in Mechanical Engineering from University of Kerala. Over to you, Nirmal.
So just before getting a discussion with our guest, we'll have a quick intro about our guest. So let's get ready to know from one of the best in the field, from Prem.
Hello everyone. I would like to introduce the guest, Dr. Avinkrishnan. Dr. Avinkrishnan is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Michigan in the Department of Aerospace Engineering.
His primary research focuses on mechanics of solids and structures with applications including design for manufacturing, topology optimization, carbon fiber laminates, machine learning, and additive manufacturing, including robotic automated fiber placement, RAFP, and 3D printing.
A simple search on Google Scholar with the keyword Vijay Chandra would reveal a mind-blowing 11 research paper with 100 citation on thin wall structures, composite materials, their manufacturing and structural analysis, and has 12 research conference proceedings with the American Institute of Manufacturing and Structural Analysis and American Society for Composites Technical Meeting, Seattle, Washington. He has a wealth of programming experience in Python, MATLAB, Fortran, and FEA software packages like Abacus, SolidWorks, HyperWorks, OpenVSP, etc. He's been in the US for a period of 11 years. He's a PhD holder with doctoral degrees in aerospace engineering from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and another in aerospace and aeronautics and astronautics from the University of Washington, Seattle, which was then transferred to University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. He did his master's from University of Michigan in aerospace engineering and civil engineering. He did his bachelor's from National Institute of Technology, Surat, Kal, in civil engineering. Previously, he had worked with Toyota Research Institute, North America, performing analysis of laminated composite parts for lightweighting. He had also performed stability analysis of thin-wall shell members to identify local and Euler buckling while optimizing laminate layups. So he had also won multiple awards and recognition and had won various accolades during his illustrious career, which includes winning Aerospace Outreach Champion Award, Department of Aerospace Engineering, University of Michigan, March 2021, ASME Boeing Best Paper Award, AIAA Science Technology, 2019, January 2020, Institute Merit Scholarship, NIT Surat Kal, August 2009, Central Sector Scheme Scholarship, HRD Ministry, Government of India, September 2008 to April 2012. He was also involved in various activities like founding of Aerospace Teaching Academy, Detroit, Michigan, aimed at educating and motivating high school students to pursue a career in aerospace engineering. He is a member of Graduate Student Advisory Committee, GSAC, DEI Subcommittee, Visitor Aerospace Outreach Committee. He is also a mentor in senior design projects, Aerospace 405, Aerospace Engineering, University of Michigan. He is also a technical reviewer in a handful of science journals related to aerospace engineering and composite structures. His leadership qualities are evident in his accomplishments listed out, besides being a pro in managing events and a champion in writing and public speaking. That's all about the introduction about the guest. Over to Nirmal.
Yeah, now let's go ahead with what Avin has to say, and after that we'll go ahead with the discussion questions.
Sure. Thanks, Prem, for the introduction. So my background is in structures and solid mechanics. I started my graduate studies at the University of Michigan in 2012, immediately after I finished my Bachelor's of Technology in Civil Engineering from NIT Surat Kal. So from the beginning, I was focusing on structures and taking courses in structures and solid mechanics, computational mechanics in general, and started doing a coursework on composites with Professor Anthony Vaz, who later on became my PhD advisor. And at that point of time, I had taken a wealth of courses in aerospace, and it made more sense to switch over to aerospace at that point. I graduated with a dual master's in 2014, and I worked for Toyota for almost a year and a half. Upon which I started my PhD at the University of Washington, pursued it for almost 2 years, and then moved back to University of Michigan to continue my PhD. Graduated after defending my thesis in 2021, and then joining as a postdoc at University of Michigan itself.
I think Arun can go ahead with the first question. Over to you, Arun.
Okay, to kick off this podcast, first of all, we would, as aerospace industry is pushing the boundaries of technology and materials to design and build more efficient and reliable aircraft these days, especially with the recent successful test flight of the Airbus E-Fan-X hybrid electric aircraft. So, based on all these recent trends, can you explain how your research in the aerospace department focuses on materials and structures, and what is the challenge in designing and manufacturing these structures, and what are the constraints involved, what are the defects in these processes, etc., in a very kind of a layman words? Then it would be very helpful for our listeners.
Sure. Thank you, Arun. That's a great question. So my research in particular stems from solid mechanics and connects a little bit to material science as well. And the major point of view is basically how do you make or how do you design from a structures perspective an efficient aircraft. Now, structural engineering in general is one of the tenets of aerospace engineering, which is really important. It's unavoidable for a airframe manufacturer to build an airplane without doing any structures calculation. So that's one of the basic foundational stones in there. How are we focusing ahead? if you know already, for more than 10 years, both the Boeing 787 and the Airbus A350 have been flying, and these airplanes are predominantly 80% by volume and 50% by mass composite materials, which aims at reducing the total weight of the structure, which eventually reduces the fuel consumption. So pushing more boundaries, understanding the manufacturing processes, designing based on those manufacturing processes, and then how can you incorporate the tenets of structural engineering like FEA and computational modeling and stuff like that into designing structures that are redundant, that are removed of any unwanted materials. So optimize for a structure based on the manufacturing processes that you're using, understanding the constraints of the processes, understanding the different aspects of the processes, not necessarily constraints, but things like you mentioned, like having defects. How do we cater to having those defects? How do we know when manufacturing that these defects are in place? And when we know that, how do we go back and recreate the same structure, mitigating some of those defects? Some defects can be good, some defects are detrimental. So identifying those things. So essentially tying all of them together for a large umbrella term of what is called as design for manufacturing, particularly focused on composites, using robotic automated fiber placement, which is a robotic method for manufacturing composite laminates. And the second one is definitely additive manufacturing, because you're seeing more and more additive manufacturing is coming to the forefront, and that's going to be the future. So how do airframe manufacturers then move into the field of additive manufacturing, which companies like GE and Rolls-Royce are already using for some of the airplane engine parts. So the engine blades are additively manufactured. So how do we create those structures with minimum amount of defects, and how do we create those structures optimally in such a way that we can take away any redundant weight? So to give in a nutshell, design for manufacturing is what I call my research, which is basically looking forward to incorporating different technologies, but also different mathematical tools like FEA, optimization, machine learning, surrogate modeling, things like that.
Thank you.
So, just for the listeners' understanding, can you just tell a brief about what is additive manufacturing? How is it different from like a composite or?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, in general, if you see the history of aviation, right? Traditionally, airplanes were made out of aluminum, and there are some other metals as well used in specific parts like engines and stuff, like titanium and even titanium magnesium alloys, titanium aluminum alloys, and things like that. But if you see the specific density of these materials are much higher, even though they give almost the same amount of stiffness as materials like composites. Now, composites are called composites because it has more than one element that goes in there. There is, in general, if you're talking about carbon fiber composites, you have fibers and you have matrix. Those are from the material point of view. And when we come to additive manufacturing, the easiest way to look at it is if you think of manufacturing something out of a metal. Usually you would go by, you would either have some sheet metal forming, or you will have some milling. Most of these processes take a large block of metal and then they chip away whatever is not needed. So let's call that subtractive manufacturing. You're taking a large chunk of metal and then chipping away from it to create the structure you want. As opposed to additive manufacturing, wherein you're building it layer by layer, you're building it one after the other. Now, it's again an umbrella term, so there is no specific way of explaining one particular way that additive manufacturing is characterized, because there are different methods involved in additive manufacturing. Some of them are better, some of them are bad, some of them are good for certain applications, etc. But in general, the idea is that you can build a structure layer by layer. You can build a structure from the ground up and not chip away any additional material from there. So hence the term additive manufacturing.
Thank you, Dr. Avin, for that simple explanation. So I'll go ahead with the next question. So nowadays, with the increase in competition in academic job, many recent PhD graduates are turning to postdoctorate fellowship as a way to enhance their research skills and also increase the chance of landing as a professorship at universities. So can you provide some insights on the postdoctoral fellowship opportunities available in the United States, and who offers this fellowship, and are they primarily through collaboration with industries or within universities and research institutions?
Sure, that's a very good question as well. So to begin with, the unfortunate thing about the United States is that if you're not a citizen of the United States, or at least if you're not a permanent resident of the United States, then the amount of fellowships that you can apply shrink a whole lot. That means that foundations like National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, or any of the national labs, it's particularly difficult for somebody not having a citizenship or a permanent residency to even apply for those positions. Some of those rules have changed in the last more than a year. And some of those departments of defense and energy are opening up some positions for international students. But in general, the best way for an international student within the US or outside the US to start up with a fellowship in the US would be to reach out to faculty. And if you're able to get in to a specific postdoc position and work for maybe a year to 2 years, most of the universities have what is called as a research track non-tenured professor. That means that you would get in as a temporary faculty, and a temporary faculty who is focused only on research and not so much of a teaching load. These positions are usually not permanent positions. They are provided by different departments based on the availability of funding. But what it brings to you is that you're no more a postdoc fellow. That means that you can, in your own right, be a principal investigator. That means that you get to apply for grants. You get to apply for different fellowships from agencies like, again, NSF, DOD, DOE, and you can also hire your own postdocs, PhDs, and master's students. Now, the benefit comes from this in the way of you don't really need citizenship to apply for some of these grants, unlike fellowships. So that would be the easiest way to look at getting funding in the US as an international postdoc. That being said, at least in my field, there is significant research happening in the UK and most EU countries. So there are a whole bunch of EU/UK fellowships which are open to any citizen. So you don't have to be a UK citizen or a EU citizen to apply for those. The most important one is the Marie Curie Fellowship. I think you guys did speak about the last speaker who was also a Marie Curie Fellowship. So it's a very prestigious fellowship. There are other fellowships like the UK Research Institute Fellowship, the ETH Zurich postdoctoral fellowships, Imperial College London postdoctoral fellowships. These are all prestigious fellowships which are also applicable for any citizen, and especially some of these fellowships like the Marie Curie Fellowship promotes application from people who are currently not in Europe because they want to bring talent into Europe. So those kind of fellowships probably would be the best case scenario for students, PhD students who are trying to get into postdoc in international universities, and eventually these are very prestigious fellowships as well. So that's definitely going to be a plus point in your resume, and the application process is the only time-consuming thing because these application processes are quite rigorous. So it's almost like writing a grant proposal on your own. So it's a challenging one, but easier for international students to apply for.
Thank you, Dr. Avin, for that insight. I think Prem can go ahead with the next question. Please unmute, Prem.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's right.
So there are so many people applying for postdoc positions. They have they make a lot. They are very scared of applying. They have this premonition in their mind that applying to PhD is a Herculean task. So I wanted to clear the air by, asking this question. So what are the top mistakes to avoid while applying for a postdoc in the US? How is doing a postdoctorate fellowship after a PhD in the US different from PDF after PhD from a non-US country, let's say like a European country or Australia or the like?
So I think one of the biggest mistakes that we do as, say, South Asians in general is that we are never taught to embellish our achievements. So we are usually modest. We don't tell people, these are the things we are doing, these are the achievements that I've had, as opposed to in the US or in general, most Western countries. You have to sell yourself. That means that you have to be upfront, and you have to go and talk to people, network, write and impress upon people that you're working on really interesting projects, and these are your achievements. So the biggest challenge I think that people would face coming into US, and to be honest, even I have faced 10 years ago, is that we have to write a statement of purpose to get into a PhD program. And we don't know what is the use of a statement of purpose. We don't know what is a statement of purpose and why it is so important in these decisions. If you look from the US perspective, it is about selling yourself. It's about saying that I'm the top brass in my field, and this is why I deserve to be in your program, not the other way around. But you have to convince them that you are really good enough. Unfortunately, we have to unlearn that because, especially as Indians, from childhood, we are not taught to embellish what we are doing. We are taught to be modest. That would be the biggest mistake, first and foremost. The other things that I would talk about would be work-life balance. Work-life balance is notorious in the United States that we don't have much of it, as opposed to European universities. Even in academic positions in European universities, there are a certain number of days that you have to take holidays in a year. You have restrictions on the number of hours you can work, as opposed to US. In an academic setting, you as a PhD student would get stipend for working for 20 hours a week. As a postdoc, you would get paid for working 40 hours a week. But essentially we end up working 60, 70, 80 hours per week. So that means that there is much less time for doing anything else. Much less time for family, much less time for taking vacations, much less time to catch up with friends. That is something that's significantly different from most of the rest of the world. There are exceptions that we know of, but still. So that again is another big cultural shock coming in. The other thing regarding like why US is different, at least in my understanding, is that US is a fairly rich country. That means that the disposable sum that you would get for a research grant is comparatively accessible. The process of getting it is challenging. The process of getting it is tiresome, just like any other country. But there are more number of fellowships available. There are more number of grants available. So as opposed to, say, UK or EU countries, there is a good chance, if you put in all the extra work and have no other commitments in life, there is a good chance you would get more and more grants. So that would be the other plus point. Regarding applying specifically to postdocs, the best idea would be to start researching, just like how when you start applying for PhD positions, start researching on which all professors and which all universities are you interested in. And don't be shy. Reach out to them. Writing a detailed email about what you work on, and have a resume which is really showing off your career, because that is what people look for here. And do not be disheartened if you don't get replies from professors, because a whole lot of professors, even as a senior postdoc, I get emails from so many students from so many different places that from the professor's point of view, they may not reply to all the emails. So if you are talented enough to showcase yourself to be really good in your field and use those catchphrases in the email headlines and in the subject line, and sell yourself, there is a good chance that the professor would reply back to you, and that would mean that you are getting visible. Most of the times, postdocs, other than fellowships, are written in the form of grants. So when a professor applies for a grant, they usually budget, I want to have one postdoc and one PhD student for this project. And that amounts to X amount of money as salary, X amount of money for health insurance, X amount of money for other things. And they budget it based on that. So that means that if there's an open position, that is usually because the professor has won a grant. And when that happens, there are two ways in which they move ahead. One is they post on the university jobs portal. And most importantly, in the US, there are federal laws and there are state laws. So if you're applying for a public university, then they have certain mandates that they have to have this job application on the job portal for 1 month, for example. What you do by directly reaching out to a professor is going to the front of the line. That means in some way, sure, it may be cheating a little bit, but then you are showing off to the professor and getting him or her or them convinced that you are really good. So that means that they can then circumvent the process to hire a certain candidate that they have already figured out has all the merits. So that would be one of the main things. Do not shy away. Research on the professors that you want to work with, research on the work they've done, and curate individual emails. And I think as a applicant to PhD programs and master's programs, the biggest thing I did was I kept the same statement of purpose for every application. I only changed the names of professors and changed the names of universities I'm applying to, as opposed to at this point of your career, when you're looking for a postdoc fellowship, the talent there is to curate emails and tell somebody else that you're really good at what they're doing. So how do you connect that? And how do you show motivation that I want to work on this field? And these are my experiences, which is going to be an asset for your group. So that would be the key thing to reach. Unfortunately, if you're not able to get to the front of the line, that does not mean that you will not be hired at all. There are so many professors at so many positions which are open for regular processing. That means that it goes to a university job portal. Sometimes they post on other websites, the main one being Academic Keys. Academic Keys is a website that's heavily used by universities to advertise positions, both for faculty positions as well as postdoc positions. And in my field, in solid mechanics or in general mechanics, there is a website called imechanica.org, which has a lot of open calls for postdocs, for PhD students, tenured and non-tenured faculty. And that, again, is a direct route to get to the normal processing of the applications as well. So there is no set in stone rule, but be very aware of what you're going to do, because the biggest mistake that people would do is to look at positions that you're not really interested in, but may have some relation to what you're doing. So that would not be a good idea, because especially at this level, when you're going to a postdoctoral fellow, the expectations are not just doing research. The expectations are doing research, mentoring other students, including undergrads, other graduate students, both masters and PhDs. So bring in the wealth of knowledge for you to a field that you are passionate about, and make sure that you, again, curate your whole profile for those specific interests. That would be my piece of advice. I know it's a long advice, but to sum it up, that would be it.
That's a great advice, Dr. Avin. I would like to add one more bit of question along with that. Say, for example, a person who has done a PhD in numerical modeling, and if he wished to do a experimental in his further research, and for that he is applying for a postdoc position which has that experimental component as well, then how do you go with that? Like, what is your opinion in that perspective, like learning experimental stuff or trying to do something experimental as a part of his interest in research?
That's a really good question. Personally, in my background, I am a person who does both numerical modeling as well as experimental modeling. So my larger philosophy is that experiments is what is happening in real life. Every other model is flawed. So every numerical model that you make is flawed. It cannot exactly capture what happens in the lab. But then you try to bring out the best model possible, which has the lowest error for the domains that you're looking for the values you're looking for. What is the best model that you could tune to get the results in your experimental data, right? So if you have a PhD purely, say, in numerical modeling, but you're really passionate about getting into experimental, that does not stop you from applying. So the best idea then would be to apply for groups or for professors, research groups that deal with both of them, that deal with numerical and experimental. Because once you get into a specific position associated with a certain lab, then you're a member of that lab. So that means that you have a learning process, and that's again the learning process as an academician is a continual process. It doesn't stop with the PhD. It doesn't stop with the postdoctoral fellowship. So definitely the best idea would be at that point to get into a group which does both, because your asset that you bring into the group is numerical modeling, and what you receive from that group is going to be learning how to do experiments and process data, and how do you get those results up and running. So that would be my advice.
Thank you for that. I think Arun can go ahead with the next question.
As like someone with 11 years of experience now in US academics as a researcher and as well as a student, so can you share with our listeners some of the insights on the student life of a PhD in the US, and if you can specifically say on an average like how they manage economically without a part-time job, and also like from your experience, what is the difference in the academic research culture for a PhD students, maybe in terms of funding, resources, support, etc. Then it would be nice.
So that's a good question. So as an international student coming to the US government allows you to work only for 20 hours a week, and that should be on campus. What happens when you are a PhD student with funding is that your funding is given to you as a salary or a stipend for the work you do, as the remuneration for 20 hours a week of work. So the quality of life in US depends on where you land. For example, I have been in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a fairly small college town in a Midwestern state. There is no heavy state tax for income. There is the cost of living is fairly low, as opposed to when I moved to Seattle. It's a bigger city. It has a significant higher cost of living. So you cannot have a single number based on which I can say that X amount of hours of work would fetch you the money you require to do day-to-day life. But in a broader picture, when a student gets into a PhD program, and purely from an engineering perspective, almost all good universities, R1 research universities in the US, provide at least 1 year of fellowship. And then there are universities like Michigan, which across the board, irrespective if you're doing a PhD in engineering or a PhD in medicine, or even a PhD in, say, education or English literature, you are provided 4 to 5 years of committed funding in your offer letter. That means that subject to your successful performance year after year, as attested by your advisor and your committee, you have a commitment of funding from the university. Not all universities are like that. There are some universities like University of Michigan, and if I'm correct, Purdue, UIUC, there are a couple of these universities which give that commitment a priori. So you go into the program knowing that. That also means that your 20 hours per week of working is covered by that. Usually this stipend that the university commits come from your advisor's research grants. But in cases when there are semesters when your research advisor does not have significant research grants, then the university usually provides positions like graduate student instructors, TA positions, or even fellowships to cover those semesters when you don't have funding coming from your advisor. Then there are other kinds of universities. When I was in University of Washington, this was the case there. They usually provide a 9-month fellowship because it's an academic position. It's usually paid for 9 months, and then they would, renew a contract based on how your performance is and the availability of funding. That means that even if you're a very successful candidate, if the department doesn't have sufficient funds, then it's kind of like a fight to get funding. Who's going to get the funding, and then who is not? At that point, there are certain caveats of living in the US which comes into place as an international student. If you're not employed and if you don't have an employee-sponsored health insurance, you are mandated to buy one from the marketplace, and that as a international student is mandatory. And again, it's basically, even if you find a part-time job, those jobs usually don't have healthcare associated with it. So that's the biggest challenge, which we don't face in India at all. So it may come as something that's completely unrelatable for people, because that's not the case back in India. We have accessible healthcare as opposed to here. So the second thing is, again, cost of living is significantly higher. So if you do not have the chance of getting a funding to continue your research, then that would also mean that you may have to self-fund for both your tuition and also for your living. So that's, again, another thing, that even when you're a PhD student, you are just not working, you're registering for research every semester, and even research is considered as a course, and you are supposed to maintain n number of minimum credit hours, and you have to pay tuition for that if you're not funded. That would be the biggest challenge. So caveats in there. But again, the other thing which is more important is also how does having fellowships from the universities help your resume. So in a broader picture, if you see, personally, I have received 3 scholarships from University of Washington over 2 years that I was there. They are, again, considered legitimate scholarships, legitimate fellowships. So those are, additional things that can go into your resume. So just like how I mentioned earlier, you have to sell yourself. So your resume should basically have all of these additional, bullet points. And getting first year fellowship itself is a big deal, but always be considered, be considerate about the fact that you may or may not have funding in some universities, and it's very important for you to choose an advisor who has a history of successful grants. If not, then there would be uncertainty going into the future. The second piece of advice that I would give is rather not a piece of advice, but something that people should keep in mind. Usually in the US, if you're a non-tenured faculty, or if you're a tenured track faculty, you are in your initial years as an assistant professor, and young assistant professors are always fighting to get more grants because they are focused on the tenure process. After joining as an assistant professor, within 5 to 6 years, your department would review your file and decide whether you should be continuing as a professor or not. And at that point, you get a tenure. And once you get the tenured position, you cannot be fired from the department unless for really bad conditions, unethical behavior or something like that. But otherwise, in a normal course of events, that is considered to be the positive part of academia, wherein you spend 5 to 6 years as a tenure track professor, and then you get tenured. And once you get tenured in one university, that means that you will get into tenured positions in any other university. So assistant professors who are new to the field, they will fight with you to get more fellowships, get more grants. That means that you will have more projects on your resume to show. You will say that, okay, fine, I worked on n number of different research and n number of different grants, as opposed to established professors who usually have funding and they have a security of funding. They've already done all the selling about themselves that they had to do as a junior professor, right? So they've already made contacts. They already have friends and collaborators in different funding agencies. So in a way, your funding is secure, or it's more secure if you go to a well-renowned, fairly senior professor. So that would be something to keep in mind. Which is better? I don't know. That's an open question.
Thank you.
I think Prem can go with the next question.
Sorry about that. Sorry. we have explored your so we have introduced your field of research in our introduction, like it is related to manufacturing of composites and structural analysis of composites and thin wall structures. uh, so I would like to ask which universities or countries are doing promising research in this area?
That's a very good question. US definitely has a lot of research happening in composites, and again, I think it was just coincidence that your first speaker was also from the field of composites. So composites is a very young field. It's still just blossoming into teenage, because these structures are just new. It's been there only over the, I mean, composites as a structure has been there, material has been there for a long time, for even like construction of dams, and even to some extent reinforced concrete as a composite, which it has two separate materials. But the likes of what we are talking about, carbon fiber composites, Kevlar, glass fiber, these have been around for last 50 years or so, and is making progress every day as we are speaking. So US definitely is a hotspot for composites research. And the one interesting point I would bring forward is that most of these cutting edge structural / material research comes from aerospace, because we are looking for lightweighting. We are looking for materials that can give us, if you're aware of Ashby charts, you're looking for materials that can give high stiffness, high strength, and lower densities. So just not composites. The other coming fields are manufacturing of composites itself, robotic manufacturing, additive manufacturing, additive manufacturing of not just plastics or metals, but additive manufacturing of continuous carbon fiber composites. All of these research get a lot of funding in the US. The second best, I would say, would be UK/Europe, purely because the biggest, there's a duopoly in commercial airplane manufacturing. Boeing is in the US, and the Airbus is a conglomerate within different countries of EU/UK. So UK and EU definitely have a lot of research happening in composites. UK has its own National Composite Center at the University of Bristol. The best universities in some sense in composites itself you see in UK, Imperial College, University of Bristol, and University of Nottingham. Then the next one would be Belgium, Catholic University, Belgium. There is TU Delft in Amsterdam, Netherlands, ETH Zurich in Switzerland, Portugal, University of Porto, and a couple of other universities in Italy. These would be the main, non-US European countries. And there is significant research in composite happening with the Japan Space Agency, JAXA, and a lot of other research happening in South Korea as well. So these are, in general, the places that to look for. I do know that India is also focused on composites to some extent. Some of them, are work done by ISRO that civilians don't get to hear, but there are significant research happening in India as well to some extent. The biggest challenge would be, again, I think, coming from economy, having the difficult exchange rates for transaction. We don't get to see a lot of big money research in these niche topics in India. That would be the biggest difference. So these are the countries to look for if you're looking for composites. And if you want to chat more, you can always shoot an email to me, and I would be happy to talk.
I would like to ask a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
Coming from a material science background, I would like to know more about this. Like, so I had done a few research in, let's say, TEM, SEM, and this basic characterization techniques, and let's say a bit of material science and everything. So would that help? Let's say if somebody who has done the same, gone through the same track line as mine, would it really help for students like us to apply for positions in the US? I mean, how would we frame ourselves to apply for such positions?
That's a great point. So one of the things that we do in structural engineering is that we have scales. We have scales in which we are designing for structures. Even solid mechanics, the biggest field that we say, which composes of solid mechanics and fluid mechanics is continuum mechanics. And continuum mechanics is defined as mechanics that are valid for the continuum scale. That means that we are not looking at micro scale. We are looking at larger scale. We are looking at structural levels. For example, if you take a wing of Boeing 787, that's a structure. We are designing those structures in a macro scale. And then you go down to component level. You take a small component and then go further down, you have composite. And when you go down composites, you have then fibers and matrix. And how do you model these things, right? So one way to model is homogenize things, and homogenize material models are used in general for macro scale designs of all of those things. But then when you come to things like failure or fatigue life, you do need to include analysis happening in the micro scale. And how do we know what happens in the micro scale is where material scientists come in, right? I mean, as structural engineers, if you do not know how a specific mode of failure is going to happen in the structure, there is no point of designing that structure against failure. So definitely in composites itself, I as a composite designer done some material research. I've done some SEM. I've done some optical microscopy, some ultrasound scanning, MRI scans. But there is a lot more, especially not just in composites, but also for additive manufacturing. Metal additive manufacturing, in particular, has a notoriety for having a lot of porosity. So how do you characterize the porosity? How are you going to make material models to capture the effect of these defects? So those become the area of interest for material scientists. And I know for a fact that at the University of Michigan, there is significant research happening in collaboration between aerospace and material science, which is purely dealing with microscale modeling of materials. So definitely, the repertoire that you're talking about in terms of a material scientist is definitely useful. It's a strong repertoire that you have, and you should probably explore more opportunities.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dr. Avin, for the valuable insight. So over to Nirmal.
So for a researcher, finding funds for your project is crucial for their success, right? So can you share with our listeners some tips and strategies for identifying and assessing potential grant opportunities that align with the goals and objectives of the research? And how do we evaluate this potential grants to support our work, or what are some of the key factors that we have to consider when we are applying?
That's a great question. I have to circle back again to the same point that I mentioned. It's all about selling yourself. The more you sell yourself at different venues, the more people get to know you. Talking in very crude terms, right? So attend conferences, present your research in front of a wider audience, get that recognition. Talk to people as if you really know what you're doing. Even if you have a background of imposter syndrome going in your head, when you go ahead and speak in front of a public audience, show them that you're really good, and show them that you have your research to back that up. You're just not being an imposter saying I'm good at XYZ, but you have the results to prove that. The second important thing would be an active member in professional societies. For mechanical engineering, it would be the American Society for Mechanical Engineers. For aerospace, it would be the American for Aeronautics and Astronautics. These are all, by the way, even though they're American societies, they are all open for international memberships. The best way to become a member is to present at one of their annual conferences, and automatically it gives you a year of subscription as a member. More importantly, as a postdoc, if you go for these, or postdoc, or just as a faculty as well, when you go for these conferences, make sure that you attend the technical meetings and get into technical committees, get to know people, have networking both online and offline, have a very strong presence in LinkedIn, have your own website, let the world know that you are visible and that you're doing significant work. That would bring in a lot of attention to what you're doing, and that'll bring in a lot of people who are interested to hear from you what you're doing. The next most important thing would be to have collaborators, just like what Prem asked me before. At this point in engineering, we usually don't have a lot of things that scope, whose scope just restricts to one field. So there are always researchers who are willing to collaborate, and to some extent there is a little bit of interest for senior faculties to write proposals with junior faculties, because that shows their mentorship role as well. So get to know senior researchers, professors in your field, try to get collaboration from them, try to have them somehow included in your resume as well, which would also be a selling point for you to say that, oh, I did my X and Y and Z grants with so and so professors. And that becomes another key point for you to sell, because that gives you a legitimacy as a researcher who has collaborated with somebody who is already well established in your field. So those would be the main ideas, I would say. At the end of the day, there are two components. The first component is technical merit, and that should be there in your work. But at the same time, more important than technical merit is to be visible and for people to know you. And the more people get to know you, there is a higher success rate for your grant applications.
Thank you so much for that insight, because that's something we Indians are lacking, because that's what you mentioned. Like we tend to be more modest, and that is actually backfiring us in a way that it's hindering our research progress as well. So I think this was a great session, and I think Arun can go ahead.
To summarize the entire the session that we had with Dr. Avin, I would say that we started like a journey. Like we started with how a person can look for applications in the US, right from the master's point of view to we traveled to postdoc applications, and how a person can look for fundings and look for the different perspectives of the fundings that a particular faculty will have, let's say junior faculties and professors, and how they can decide based on the history of the professors to do whether a postdoc, whether a PhD, or even a master's. Then we talked a bit about how a PhD life happens in the US, and what are the major things that a person has to keep in mind to survive in the US. Especially a point noted was the healthcare insurance aspects, which is actually a major thing to note before traveling, before even thinking about traveling to US. And we talked more about the design of composites and about the additive manufacturing and the newer trends, and also the discussion map not only to just doesn't stick to US, but Avin has given a lot many universities throughout the world where these kind of researchers are happening, and where if people are interested, they can look at those. They can search those universities and find the professors that are working on such areas. We also have covered about the advantages of having dual skills like numerical as well as experiment, and how it is important to sell yourself, how you stand out not only in your online communication, that is networking, but how it is important to take part in conferences and as well as attend workshops, etc. And bit about how to stand out by writing an email or making a resume, etc. So we all had a pleasant discussion, and it was kind of a knowledge value-added session for us as well as to our listeners as well. Thank you, Dr. Avin, for sharing your valuable time with us and sharing your immense experience of your journey in the US. And we hope all the best for your future endeavors as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.